It wasn't a big fight. It was the silence between us that kept growing louder. That's how it starts, doesn't it? Not with yelling or doors slamming. Just absence. Quiet where there used to be warmth. Stillness where there used to be small touches, shared laughter, unfinished sentences only the two of you understood. Now, everything's just neat. Clean. Functional. The house we lived in was beautiful. Picture perfect, even. Hardwood floors that glowed in the sunlight, a kitchen backsplash we argued over for weeks and eventually chose together, throw pillows that matched the vases, and towels that were more decorative than useful. People complimented our home. They called it peaceful. But they didn't hear the silence between the walls. They didn't feel the cold in a king-sized bed where nobody reached for anyone anymore. I'm Grace Gutierrez. I've been married to Avery Ramirez for 12 years. And somewhere along the way, we stopped being lovers. We became two people who lived in the same house and didn't want to cause trouble. We got good at it. Too good. Avery is a good man. Kind, in the way people describe someone who always pays his taxes on time and sends flowers on anniversaries. Dependable. Respected. He doesn't lie, cheat, or raise his voice. But he also doesn't really see me. Not anymore. Maybe he hasn't in years. So when he told me, casually, over dinner one night, that his son would be staying with us for the summer, I nodded. He just needs a place to land for a while, he said, pouring himself a second glass of wine. Valeria's project got extended in Tokyo. She's already moved, and Evan doesn't want to go back to Chicago just yet. He said it like it was a calendar update. A shift in the weather. I nodded, because that's what I do now. I don't ask why we don't talk about these things. I don't ask why he doesn't ask if I'm comfortable. I just nod, like I'm signing for a delivery that isn't mine. He's grown now, Avery added. He won't be in the way. It was only later, after the dishes were done, after he kissed my temple like he was clocking out of his shift, that I stood in the hallway and let the weight of that statement settle in. Evan. His son. 22 now. Nearly a decade since I last saw him. He was just a lanky teenager then, polite and a little shy. I remembered his quiet voice, the way he always thanked me for dinner even when he barely touched the food. I hadn't thought of him in years. That Friday morning, he arrived. I was by the front window when the rideshare pulled up. I pretended to be dusting the sill, but I was watching. A black duffel bag slung over one shoulder. Hoodie sleeves pushed up to the elbows. Taller than I remembered, broader, too. His face had thinned out, sharpened. But the eyes were still the same. Calm. Quiet. Still. He stood at the bottom step of our porch and paused. For a second, I thought he might ring the bell and leave. But then he raised his hand and pressed it once. The doorbell echoed down the hallway, and I heard Avery's voice float in from the other room. He's early. That's all he said. No urgency in his steps as he went to greet him. No anticipation. Just routine. Logistics. By the time I opened the door, Evan was already standing there, smiling in that small, practiced way men do when they're used to hiding their thoughts. Hi. Grace, he said. I nodded, offering a soft smile. Come in. You remember the house, don't you? He stepped inside, and I swear, the air changed. I can't explain it. It wasn't colder. It wasn't warmer. Just different. Like someone had opened a window I didn't realize had been shut for years. There was movement in the air now. Awareness. Something shifted. He walked through the hall slowly, glancing at the updated furniture and framed photos we hadn't changed since 2018. And I watched him walk, the way he carried himself, like he was used to people looking but didn't care if they did. There was something in the way he stood, the way he spoke. It wasn't arrogance. It was stillness. Self-assurance that came from something deeper than age. Avery showed him to the guest room like it was just another item on the checklist. Drop your stuff. We'll do dinner later, he said, already heading back to the office to take a call. Evan paused at the doorway, turned to me, and said quietly, "Thanks again, for letting me stay." It was polite. Thoughtful. Normal. But it landed differently. Not because of what he said. But how he said it. Soft. Intentional. Like he was actually looking at me. Like he saw me. Not as someone's wife. Not as the lady of the house. But as a woman standing barefoot on hardwood floors, holding her breath without realizing it. He walked inside the room and closed the door behind him. And I stood there for a long second, staring at the wood grain, trying to remember the last time someone had made me feel that scene, with nothing more than a glance. That's when it started. Not the affair. Not even desire. Just the shift. The flicker. The quiet reawakening of something I thought I'd packed away with old photos and forgotten anniversaries. And somewhere in the deepest part of myself, I knew. The silence in our house had finally been interrupted. There's a kind of intimacy that doesn't require words. Not touch. Not eye contact. Just presence. Two people sharing the same space, breathing the same air, and saying absolutely nothing. That's what it became between Evan and me. Not flirtation. Not anything that would earn a raised eyebrow or a whispered suspicion. Just movement. Routine. Parallel silence. Avery was gone more than usual. He'd picked up some new expansion project at his firm and used it as a reason to leave early and come home late. I don't think he noticed that I stopped asking when he'd be back. I don't think he realized I'd already stopped waiting. Mornings felt the same. Coffee in one cup. Almond milk in the other. I'd find Evan at the counter most days, already showered, scrolling through his phone with his earbuds dangling around his neck like an afterthought. He'd nod. I'd nod back. Sometimes he'd pass me the kettle without asking. Sometimes I'd set a second mug out before he came in. Little things. Automatic things. The kind you only do when someone's energy starts syncing up with yours. We never talked about the silence. It just lived there. Between rooms. Between sips. Between the sound of the laundry spinning and the distant creak of hallway floorboards that only gave under the weight of someone moving carefully. It wasn't romantic. But it wasn't neutral either. The house was quieter at night. Quieter than usual. There was something about knowing Evan was still awake, behind another door, headphones in, light glowing beneath the frame, that made my skin feel too tight and my robe too soft. I would find myself walking slower through the hallway. Pausing by the guest room like I had a reason. I never knocked. Never peeked in. But the air outside that door felt warmer than the rest of the house. Like something was living there. Something awakened. It was close to midnight when I padded downstairs for a glass of water. I hadn't been able to sleep. Not from stress. Not from anxiety. Just from something unspoken moving around inside me. Like my body was remembering how to feel again and it didn't know what to do with itself. The kitchen was dark. Only the blue LED glow of the fridge lit the room. I thought I was alone, until I heard the soft clink of glass against porcelain. Evan was there. Shirtless. He stood by the sink, drinking water straight from a tall glass, one hand braced on the edge of the counter, the muscles in his back flexing beneath the low light. He didn't startle when he saw me. Didn't apologize for being half-dressed. Didn't fumble to make himself small like so many men do when they realize they've been seen. He just looked at me. Level. Calm. Present. "You can't sleep either?" I asked, my voice rough from the quiet. He shook his head, setting the glass down. "I like the silence," he said. "It feels honest." I nodded, even though I didn't completely understand what he meant. But somehow, I did feel it. The honesty. The stripped-down, midnight version of us, no roles, no titles, no expectations. Just a woman in a robe and a man drinking water like nothing needed to be explained. I crossed the kitchen slowly, my bare feet soft against the tile. I opened the cabinet for a mug even though I wasn't planning to make tea. I just needed something to do. Something to keep my hands busy while my heart beat loud enough to feel. He watched me. Not obviously. Not hungrily. But watchfully. And that was worse. Because it wasn't lust. It was awareness. He noticed the way I held the mug with both hands. The way my robe shifted slightly when I reached up. The way I exhaled just before speaking, then chose not to. He noticed it all. And didn't speak. We stood in that kitchen for maybe 2 minutes. But it stretched. It felt longer. Like we had been rehearsing that moment without realizing it. I turned to leave, nodding gently. "Good night," I whispered. "Night," he replied, quiet but steady. And I walked away. Not quickly. Not stiffly. Just, aware. Every step is calibrated. Every breath was noticed. I didn't look back. Not because I didn't want to. But because I didn't trust myself if I did. I dreamed that night. Not clearly. Not the kind of dream you can describe to someone in the morning. But when I woke up, there was a weight in my chest. Not pain, pressure. Like something had shifted inside of me and it wasn't ready to settle yet. I remembered how he looked in the kitchen. The curve of his shoulder. The quiet in his voice. The steadiness in his eyes. And even though we hadn't touched. Even though we hadn't even said much. I knew something had begun. Not the kind of thing you name. Not the kind you run from. Just a crack in the silence. And once a crack appears, it never stays small. The days started to blur after that night in the kitchen. Nothing drastic changed, no dramatic shift, no obvious boundary crossed, but something in me had stirred. And once something stirs, it doesn't go back to sleep quietly. I began reaching for different things in the mornings. Lipstick, first. Nothing bold, just a soft red with a satin finish. The kind I hadn't worn in years, the kind that made me feel awake, if not beautiful. Then came the silk blouses, buried deep in the drawer beneath the cotton. I started choosing the ones that brushed against my skin like a secret. The ones that made me feel seen, even if no one said a word. Evan didn't say anything. But he noticed. You can always tell when someone notices. Not from what they say, but from what they don't. The way their eyes pause, then pretend not to. The way a silence stretches just a beat longer than it should. He did that. Often. Sometimes, when we crossed in the hallway, he'd nod. Other times, he didn't need to. His presence filled the space between us like heat. It was a Tuesday when the moment happened. Laundry day. Not a glamorous scene, not one you'd put in a romance novel. But maybe that's what made it so potent. It was real. Small. Bare. The laundry room was narrow, more like a walk-in closet that had been converted into something functional. The dryer made a low, humming sound that filled the silence. I had the basket perched on my hip, full of folded whites. The scent of detergent clung to the air, fresh, almost clinical. I was stacking towels onto the top shelf when I heard the floorboard shift behind me. Evan. He didn't say anything, just stepped inside, holding a small stack of kitchen rags, already folded. "Here," he said, offering them to me. It was such a small thing. An ordinary thing. I turned to take them, and that's when it happened. His fingers grazed mine. Not by accident. Not on purpose either. Somewhere in between. A brush of skin, soft and brief, but charged. My hand held the towel too long. He didn't pull away. I didn't let go. The distance between our bodies shrank, not enough to touch, but enough to feel it. The air grew thicker. It wasn't warm. It wasn't cold. I was aware. I glanced up. And he was already looking at me. Not nervously. Not like a boy caught in something he didn't understand. But with this quiet, steady gaze that made my breath catch in my throat. He didn't look confused. He didn't look scared. He looked like he had already imagined this 100 different ways, and now, he was simply standing in the middle of one of them, waiting to see if I'd follow. I felt my heart skip, not from panic, but from recognition. Like a part of me was waking up, and it remembered this feeling from another life. We didn't move. Not for seconds. Maybe more. I could feel the hem of his t-shirt brush the inside of my arm. My elbow hovered over his chest. We weren't touching, not really. But we may as well have been. I lowered my hand slowly, letting the towel land on the shelf. My arm, on the way down, pressed lightly against his chest. He didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He just stood there, heart steady, breath calm. I turned toward the door, the air around me buzzing like static. Nothing had happened. But my skin remembered everything. That night, I opened the drawer at the back of my closet. The one with the nightgowns I hadn't touched in years. I found it folded neatly beneath a stack of old pajamas, the red robe. Soft satin. Delicate black lace along the sleeves. Something I once wore for passion. Now, I wore it for memory. For something I couldn't explain, but needed to feel. I wrapped it around myself and walked to the mirror. No makeup. No earrings. Just the robe, loose against my skin, and a pulse I could feel in my neck. I didn't sleep. Not because I was anxious. But because every time I closed my eyes, I remembered how he looked at me. Like a man who saw a woman. Not someone's wife. Not a placeholder. Not a body in the kitchen. Just a woman. Standing in a tight room. Holding a towel. Trying not to fall. I didn't plan it. Not at first. But there are nights when a silence settles over the house that doesn't feel empty, it feels expectant. Like the walls are holding their breath. Like something is supposed to happen. And the longer nothing does, the louder everything becomes. That was one of those nights. The air felt heavier than usual. Still. Warm. The kind that makes cotton feel too thick on your skin. I didn't want anything loud. Not wine. Not music. Just tea. I moved through the kitchen slowly, listening to the kettle warm, steam spiraling out like a sigh. I chose jasmine. Not for flavor, but for memory. That scent, floral and faintly bitter, always reminded me of who I used to be. Before utility. Before invisibility. Before the version of myself that only existed in to-do lists and carpool calendars. While the water steeped, I opened the cabinet where I kept my perfumes. The glass bottle sat untouched, its silver cap slightly dusty. I hadn't worn it in months. Maybe longer. I spritzed once, just beneath my collarbone. Not for anyone. Not even for him. Just, for the weight of scent. To remind myself I could still smell like a memory. I passed Evan in the hallway on my way back upstairs. He didn't speak. Neither did I. But he looked up as I walked by. Just a glance. 1 second too long. His eyes didn't drop to the floor. They didn't dart away, embarrassed. They lingered. He watched the way my hand brushed the banister. The way the hem of my robe swayed slightly as I turned the corner. And I felt it, the heat in that glance. Not burning, not aggressive. Just warm. Like standing too close to the stove without realizing it. I didn't look back. Upstairs, the house fell quiet. Lights off. Curtains drawn. I slipped into the satin robe. The same one from the drawer. Red. Loose. Soft enough to feel like a secret. I sat by the window for a while, mug in hand, watching the shadows shift across the lawn. A fox darted past once. Then nothing. Every sound became a signal. The groan of the stairs. The faint click of a door. The creak in the hallway just outside my room. Each one made my breath pause. Each one, not him. I didn't know what I wanted him to do. Knock? Enter? Say nothing and just stand there? But I knew I wanted something. Something that would make me feel chosen. Not accidentally seen, but deliberately sought. I waited. 4 minutes. Then an hour. Then 2. By the time the clock on my dresser read 2:47 a.m., my tea's gone cold, and my body had curled into the robe like armor. Still, I waited. The house remained still. Even the walls had stopped whispering. At dawn, the soft blue light slipped in through the blinds, slicing across the hardwood floor like quiet judgment. And that's when it hit me, not guilt. But shame. Not because of anything I'd done. But because of what I had wanted. Because of how long I'd sat there. Dressed like a question. Waiting for an answer that never came. The next day, I avoided him. Not because I was angry. But because I didn't know how to look at him without exposing myself. I moved through the house like a ghost, present but untouchable. I skipped breakfast. I folded laundry with my back to the door. I went outside to water the garden even though it had rained the night before. Anything to stay away from the weight of his gaze. But I couldn't avoid the room. The guest room still had fresh towels to deliver. So I went in, arms full of linens, heart steadying itself. He wasn't there. The bed was neatly made, a navy hoodie draped over the desk chair, and a stack of books near the window. I placed the towels in the closet. But when I turned to leave, I noticed something on the edge of the bookshelf. A small envelope. Faded yellow. Edges curled like it had been touched too many times. I wasn't looking for anything. But my hand reached for it anyway. Inside was a photograph. A Polaroid. Evan, maybe 9 years old. Standing in a garden. His hair messy, his smile crooked. Next to him, Valeria Sullivan. His mother. She had one arm draped casually over his shoulder, the other raised in a wave. They looked happy. Unposed. But what caught me wasn't their expressions. It was the handwriting on the back. In looping cursive, it read. You've always had that gaze. Be careful where you place it. My breath caught. It didn't feel maternal. Not completely. It felt like something else. A warning. An acknowledgement. Like she knew what that gaze could do. What it had done. I stood there a long time, staring at the words. Not be. I was thinking of heading over to the old place, he said, eyes avoiding mine. There are boxes of my mom's I never sorted. Stuff she left behind. I nodded slowly. I thought maybe you'd want to see it. I mean, if you're not busy. There was no reason for me to say yes. But I did. Before I could think too hard about it. Before I could remember what lines we weren't supposed to cross. The drive was quiet. Not uncomfortable, just careful. He didn't play music. I didn't try to fill the silence. We passed suburban storefronts and sleepy intersections where the traffic lights blinked yellow, like they were trying not to wake anyone. The house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, behind a hedge of overgrown azaleas. The paint was peeling in places. The shutters hung uneven. It looked like something that had been paused, not abandoned. Just waiting. Evan unlocked the door with a key that looked older than both of us. It stuck a little in the lock. Inside, the air smelled like dust and dried lavender. There was a stillness to it, like the walls were holding on to the last breath she took in here. We didn't speak. He moved toward a stack of boxes in the dining room. I wondered. There's something about walking through someone else's past that makes you softer. More careful. You tiptoe not because it's loud, but because it feels sacred. I moved through the room slowly, fingertips grazing wallpaper edges, picture frames, ceramic dishes still wrapped in faded newspaper. Then I found it. In what must have been her bedroom. A small, antique vanity by the window. The mirror was oval, slightly fogged at the corners. On the table, a brush. Strands of long brown hair still tangled in the bristles. Next to it, a jewelry tray. A tube of lipstick half-used and dusty. I stood there for a long time. Not touching anything. Just standing. Like I could still feel her sitting there. As if memory had weight. She used to sit there for hours. Evan's voice came from behind me. I didn't turn around. Brushing her hair. Doing nothing else. She said silence was sacred. That's where I learned it. I turned slowly then. He was leaning in the doorway, one hand resting against the frame, eyes on me, not her things. Not the mirror. Me. I walked across the room and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress creaked under my weight, but softly. He didn't move right away. Just stood there watching me like he was trying to memorize something. Then he crossed the floor in 3 slow steps and knelt beside the bed. His hand landed near mine, not touching. Just near. And I didn't move away. There was no urgency. No hesitation. Just air. And heat. And stillness. And a choice already made. When he kissed me, it was slow. Intentional. The kind of kiss that doesn't ask a question, it answers one. He didn't ask for permission. I didn't offer one. The room did. It wrapped around us. The scent of old perfume. The muted gold light through dusty curtains. The bedspread that had known other years, other secrets. His hand moved to the back of my neck. My fingers found the soft fabric of his hoodie. There was no rush. No fumbling. Just breathe. And closeness. And the hush of 2 people finally stepping into the space that had been stretching between them for weeks. When we pulled apart, we didn't speak. His forehead pressed to mine. Our breaths matched. The silence wasn't awkward, it was full. Heavy with everything we hadn't said, and now didn't need to. We didn't stay long after that. He packed a few of the boxes into the trunk. I stood in the hallway, watching the shadow of my reflection in the mirror where she used to sit. There was no guilt. Not yet. Just a hum under the skin. The kind that lingers. The ride home was just as quiet. But it's different now. Before, the silence was careful. Now, it was charged. Like a live wire resting just beneath the surface. My world didn't tilt. It didn't crash. It just quietly collapsed inward. Like everything I thought was unshakable had simply folded in on itself, soft, slow, inevitable. I didn't ask what it meant. Neither did he. We both knew better than to ruin something that was still echoing in our bodies. I didn't know what to call what we had. There was no name for something so full of weight and yet so silent. No label for 2 people who kissed once in a room filled with dust and memory and then said nothing about it after. We didn't talk. We didn't change the rhythm of the house. But something in me was different. And I thought he felt it too. I wanted to believe it meant something. That what passed between us in that room had rearranged more than just my pulse. But it's dangerous, isn't it? To start measuring meaning with someone who never promised you anything. A few days later, Avery brought it up at breakfast, like he was suggesting a trip to the grocery store, not to the middle of nowhere. There's a cabin up north, he said, scrolling on his phone. Quiet. Private. I figured we could go for the weekend. You, me. Evan too. Family time. Family. That word struck me like a bruise I didn't know I had. I nodded, too quickly. Not out of agreement, but survival. It was always easier to say yes than to explain the knot sitting at the center of your chest. Good, Avery said. Might be nice to reset. Reset. As if you could turn marriage on and off like a modem. As if packing bags and switching zip codes would resuscitate something that had been flatlining for years. The drive up to the cabin was quiet. Too quiet. I sat in the passenger seat, legs crossed, hands folded in my lap, eyes on the blur of trees passing by. Abri played an old jazz station. Evan sat in the back, earbuds in, eyes closed. Or pretending to be. I couldn't tell. I didn't look back. But I felt the distance between us. And this time it wasn't charged with anticipation. It was just vacant. The cabin was modest. Pine walls. Narrow deck. A lake that sat behind the woods like it had secrets of its own. Abri busied himself right away, checking the water heater, asking about firewood, trying to read a laminated binder of check-in instructions like his life depended on it. That's always how he worked through discomfort, by doing things. Evan stayed quiet. Not cold. Not rude. Just, somewhere else. That evening, I saw him from the window. He was walking through the woods, headed toward the gravel trail behind the cabin. Next to him, a girl. I hadn't seen her arrive. Didn't know her name. But I watched the way she tilted her head when she laughed. Watched the way she touched his arm without hesitation. Like she belonged there. She was pretty. The kind of pretty that doesn't have to work at it. Young, but not foolish. Her hair pulled back, lips glossed, voice easy. They disappeared into the trees, and I stood there too long, staring through a pane of glass that didn't fog from breath, because I wasn't breathing. Later, I saw them again. She was walking just ahead of him, and he reached out, casual, instinctive, and placed his hand on the small of her back. That was it. Just a touch. But it shattered me. Not because he found someone. But because he didn't choose me. I went back inside, numb. Not jealous. Not even angry. Just, hollow. Like someone had scooped the hope out of me and left the shape of it behind. That night, I stayed in the room with the door closed. Abri fell asleep beside me after dinner, after a glass of wine he didn't finish, after saying we should try to make this weekend about reconnection. I lay there, fully awake, staring at the ceiling, arms pinned to my sides like any movement would break whatever spell I was trying to cast on myself, to not feel. But it didn't work. I cried. Quietly. Carefully. Like the tears might alert someone to the fact that I was breaking from the inside out. It wasn't betrayal that unraveled me. It was irrelevant. The realization that maybe I had never really been chosen. Not by Abri. Not by Evan. Not even by myself. I had lived so long performing usefulness that I forgot what it meant to be desired simply for being who I was, not what I provided. Not what I cleaned. Not what I sacrificed. That night, the sheets felt colder than usual. The bed is larger. And for the first time, the word family felt like a label someone had slapped on a broken box, just to keep the contents from spilling out. Coming home should have felt like a reset. A return to something solid. Familiar. Safe. But when the front door clicked shut behind me and the suitcase wheels dragged across the wood, I realized something quietly devastating. I didn't recognize the place anymore. Not because it had changed. But because I had. The rooms looked the same. The same throw pillows fluffed on the couch. The same photo frame slightly tilted on the hallway table. The same vase filled with dried eucalyptus that no longer smelled like anything. But something in the air was different now. It didn't welcome me. It held me. Softly. Unforgivingly. Abri unpacked like nothing had shifted. He moved through the house in his routine, laundry here, groceries there, a meeting scheduled, another rescheduled. He kissed my cheek before heading to his home office. "You should rest," he said with a soft pat on my shoulder, like I was an appliance set to stand by. "You've seemed off." Seemed off. As if I hadn't been unraveling in front of him for months. As if the version of me he lived with now was just a slightly glitchy update of the same program he married. I nodded. He didn't notice the way my eyes held him a little too long. Didn't see that the woman standing in front of him was no longer waiting for him to ask what she needed. I went upstairs. Closed the door. Stood in front of the mirror. For a long time I just looked. My reflection stared back like it was trying to decide whether I was a stranger or an echo. My hair was slightly curled from sleep. My eyes were softer than usual, but not tired. The curve of my mouth held nothing. No smile. No sorrow. Just stillness. And in that stillness, I saw her. The woman I'd buried under errands and routines and polite nods. The one I used to dress for, laugh for, put perfume on for, not because anyone would notice, but because she did. I lifted my fingers to my collarbone, still bare from my robe slipping slightly. Sunlight came through the blinds, catching on my skin like a quiet crown. Then came the sound. Paper. Soft. Intentional. A letter slid under my door. No knock. No footsteps. Just that. I stared at it for a moment, not breathing. Then I picked it up. There was no envelope. Just a folded page. No greeting. No goodbye. One line. You looked away. So I did too. I read it once. Then again. And again. Each time, it pressed against my ribs a little harder. Because I knew what he meant. He hadn't left me behind. He hadn't chosen someone else. He had waited, just like I did. But I blinked first. I sat on the edge of my bed, the note still in my lap, and stared at my phone. His name was there. 5 letters. No last name. No emoji. No label. Just Evan. I hovered my finger over it. For a long time. The screen timed out twice before I woke it up again. But I didn't press the call. Because sometimes, silence says what words can't. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't waiting for him to speak. I was waiting for myself to listen. Later that afternoon, I walked barefoot into the garden. The grass was cool. The wind was quiet. And my robe, soft, silk, the same one I'd once worn to be seen, fell gently around me. The sun kissed the edge of my collarbone. Warm. Familiar. Forgiving. I closed my eyes. I wasn't looking for someone. I was waiting to be looked at. And not just by him. By anyone. By me. The woman who still wanted. Still felt. Still hoping. Not for drama. Not for escape. Just to be seen as more than what was useful. More than the shape I took in someone else's story. I never thought my stepson would cross the line. But the truth? I was already standing on it, waiting. Have you ever waited for someone to see you again, and realized they already had? If this story spoke to a part of you you buried, drop a broken heart in the comments, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to be seen.